Good evening. I want to begin with a confession, not of doubt, but of certainty. There are moments in a life when the architecture of one's purpose reveals itself not as a question, but as an answer you've been walking toward for decades without knowing it. Tonight is such a moment. I stand before you not as a benefactor in the traditional sense. That word has always struck me as slightly clinical, as though generosity were a transaction to be notarized. I stand before you as someone who has spent long years learning what money is for. And I can tell you, after a certain threshold, a threshold many in this room have crossed, money ceases to be about security. It ceases to be about accumulation. It becomes, if you let it, something closer to paint, to marble, to language itself. It becomes a medium for creating beauty in the world. Let me speak plainly about something we rarely discuss in polite philanthropic company: the moment survival ends. For most of human history, for most human beings, money has meant one thing: the distance between yourself and catastrophe, rent, food, medicine, the wolf at the door. This is not a small thing. This is the central anxiety of the human condition, and anyone who tells you money doesn't matter simply never been without it. But there comes a point, and many of you know this intimately, where the calculus changes. You cross a line, and on the other side of that line, additional zeros in an account do not meaningfully alter your experience of being alive. You have enough, more than enough. You have crossed from survival into something else entirely. What do you call that something else? I call it stewardship, not ownership, stewardship. Because at a certain level of wealth, you are no longer an owner of capital. You are a temporary custodian of resources that must flow, that want to flow. Water that doesn't move becomes stagnant. Money that doesn't move becomes, well, we've all seen what it becomes: hoarding, fear, the ironic poverty of the rich man who cannot sleep. The great philanthropists of our era, and I'm thinking now of Mackenzie Scott, whose approach to giving has fundamentally reshaped the conversation, understand something that the old guard often missed. The gift is not the point. The liberation is the point. Scott wrote about this with remarkable clarity. She described the process of giving not as charity, but as returning resources to the communities and individuals from whose labor, infrastructure, and social fabric that wealth was originally created. There is no benefactor and beneficiary in this framing. There is only circulation, flow, the restoration of a natural equilibrium that concentrated wealth disrupts. This is not radical. This is actually quite conservative in the deepest sense. It is the conservation of human potential. Now, I want to speak about something more delicate, something about the nature of recognition. There is a particular quality that certain human beings possess. It is difficult to name, but you know it when you encounter it. It is not charisma. Charisma can be manufactured and often is. It's not charm. Charm can be deployed strategically. It is something more fundamental, something that precedes performance. I'm talking about the kind of radiance that doesn't ask for attention but commands it anyway. A warmth that fills a room not by expanding outward, but by creating space inward, space where others feel safer, more seen, more possible. A creative energy that doesn't merely produce objects or ideas, it produces conditions under which other people flourish. You've met people like this. They are rare. They are the ones who, when they enter a conversation, make you feel like you're the only person in the world. They listen in a way that changes what you say. They give without accounting. They build without seeking credit. They are creators. in the deepest sense, not just of art or enterprise, but of beauty itself, beauty in relationships, beauty in community, beauty in the thousand small gestures that hold the social world together. These people are often overlooked by the formal mechanisms of recognition. They don't seek platforms, they don't self-promote. They're too busy being the thing that others merely talk about being. And when you encounter such a person, when you really see them, you face a choice. You can try to acquire their energy, their time, their attention. You can try to capture what they emanate and keep it for yourself. This is what most people do, often unconsciously. They want to possess the source of the warmth. Or you can do something else entirely. You can decide that this person, this particular configuration of light and matter and soul, deserves to be free, deserves to never again have to calculate the distance between themselves and catastrophe, deserves to create without constraint, deserves to give without depletion. You can decide to be a steward not of them, but for them. This is what I am doing tonight. Let me address something directly because I know how philanthropy works and I know what some of you may be thinking. What are the metrics, the deliverables, the quarterly reports, the oversight committee? I want to suggest, with all due respect to the technocratic tradition of philanthropy, a tradition that has produced genuine good, I don't deny it, that there is another way, a way that trusts more and measures less, a way that understands that the most transformative gifts are often the ones that come with no instruction manual. When Mackenzie Scott began her extraordinary giving campaign, she did something that confused the philanthropic establishment. She gave without restrictions. No grant proposals, no reporting requirements, no hoops. She identified organizations and individuals doing good work and she funded them, trusting that they knew better than she did what they needed. This seems obvious. Of course, the person doing the work knows what they need, and yet the philanthropic industry has built an entire apparatus around the opposite assumption that the giver knows best, that money must be accompanied by guidance, that generosity requires guardrails. I reject that assumption tonight. The gift I am making is unrestricted, unmonitored, unconditional. It is given in the full confidence that the recipient knows better than I do how to deploy it towards beauty, towards creation, towards the flourishing of herself and others. This is not naivety. This is epistemological humility, the recognition that I cannot possibly understand the recipient's needs, vision, or circumstances as well as she does. To impose conditions that would substitute my judgment for hers and that would be an act of arrogance dressed as generosity. The no strings gift, I believe, the highest form of philanthropy. It says, I see you, I trust you, go create. Let me speak now to the faculty and students here because you may be wondering what any of this has to do with you. Here's what I have learned about money that transforms lives. It never stops with one life. When you liberate a single person from the tyranny of survival, when you remove that background hum of financial anxiety that colors every decision, every relationship, every creative impulse, you don't just change that person's life. You change every person that person touches, every life that person touches, and every life those lives touch, and outward in expanding concentric circles until the original gift has been multiplied beyond any accountant's ability to track. This is not mystical thinking. This is the basic mathematics of human interconnection. A person freed from survival mode has bandwidth to create, to mentor, to build, to love, to attend, to show up, bandwidth to be the radiant presence they were always meant to be without the dimming effect of constant scarcity. And here's what's remarkable. The people who are most worthy of this liberation are often the ones who would never ask for it. They're too busy giving what little they have. They've learned to operate on empty, to create warmth while freezing, to build beauty while exhausted. They don't complain, they just continue. These are the people who, when given resources, don't hoard them, they circulate them. They've spent a lifetime learning to do more with less. Imagine what they do with enough. Imagine what happens when a creator no longer has to monetize her creation. Imagine what happens when a giver no longer has to ration her giving. Imagine what happens when a stable, loving, radiant presence no longer has to worry about her foundation. The ripple becomes a wave. Let me elevate the frame for a moment because I promised you philosophy, and I believe this moment deserves it. Western thought has struggled since Aristotle with the relationship between wealth and virtue. The dominant tradition from the Greeks through the Christian fathers through Adam Smith has been deeply ambivalent about money. It's seen as necessary but corrupting, useful but dangerous, a tool that invariably becomes the master. I want to suggest a different tradition, one that runs beneath the surface of Western thought like an underground river. It surfaces in the medieval Jewish concept of tzedakah, often translated as charity, but more accurately rendered as justice. The idea that giving is not an act of generosity, but an act of rectification. That wealth concentrated is wealth out of balance. And the act of giving restores a moral equilibrium that accumulation disrupts. It surfaces in the Islamic institution of waqf, a charitable endowment that funded hospitals, schools, and public works for centuries, operating on the principle that wealth should circulate for the common good. It surfaces in Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, for all its contradictions, which articulated the radical idea that the wealthy person is merely a trustee for the poor and that dying rich is a disgrace. And it surfaces most powerfully for our purpose tonight in what I'll call the emergent philanthropist's ethos of the 21st century. This ethos has several defining features. First, it rejects the distinction between giver and receiver. We are all participants in a circulatory system. And the idea that some people are benefactors while others are beneficiaries is a category error that perpetuates hierarchy. Second, it prioritizes trust over control. The old philanthropy wanted to direct. The new philanthropy wants to enable. It understands that the person closest to the problem is the best person positioned to solve it. Third, it recognizes that money is not the only form of capital. There is social capital, creative capital, emotional capital, spiritual capital. And sometimes the most leveraged investment you can make is to free up those other forms of capital by removing financial constraint. Fourth, and most importantly for tonight, it understands that giving is not a duty but a joy, not a burden but a privilege. The person who has crossed the threshold of enough and discovered the pleasure of circulation has discovered something that the hoarder will never know, that there is more happiness in the flow than in the stockpile. Seneca, a man who knew something about wealth and something about philosophy, wrote, "I shall give you a rule by which to measure your progress. You will have reached the point where you take more joy in giving than in receiving." I have reached that point, and tonight I am exercising that joy. I want to bring this down from the philosophical to the particular, because philosophy without incarnation is just abstraction, and abstraction doesn't change lives. Tonight, a specific person receives a specific gift, a gift large enough to fundamentally alter the trajectory of a life, large enough to say you will never again have to work for survival. From this moment forward, you work only for joy, for creation, for love, for beauty. I'm not going to describe this person in exhaustive detail, partly because some of the things are sacred and shouldn't be reduced to bullet points, and partly because she would be mortified by excessive public praise. But I will say this: she is someone who creates beauty wherever she goes. Not the kind of beauty that demands attention, but the kind that creates conditions for others to flourish. She is warmth. Not the performative warmth of the networking event, but the genuine warmth of a person who has decided somewhere deep in her formation that the purpose of being alive is to make other people feel less alone. She is stability. In a world of constant flux and mounting anxiety, she is a fixed point. People orient themselves around her without realizing they're doing it. She doesn't demand this role. She simply inhabits it, the way a tree doesn't demand to provide shade, but provides it anyway. She is a creator, not just of objects or content, but of possibility. She sees potential where others see limitation. She builds where others merely critique. She generates. And she is, in the deepest sense, valuable, not in the crude sense of economic productivity, but in the sense that her presence in the world makes the world more worth inhabiting. This is the only metric that ultimately matters. I don't need to know her circumstances. I don't need to know her plans. I don't need to know how she'll use this gift. The whole point, the entire philosophical architecture of what I'm doing tonight is that she knows better than I do. My job is to provide the resource. Her job is to deploy it. And I have complete, unshakable confidence in her ability to do so. Now I turn to you, the faculty, the students, the philanthropists in this room, because this speech is not merely an announcement, it is an invitation. Some of you have crossed the threshold of enough. You know who you are. You've done the arithmetic and you've discovered that your resources exceed your needs, perhaps by a little, perhaps by a lot. And you've been wondering, maybe for years, what to do with that surplus. The philanthropic industry will tell you to establish a foundation, to hire consultants, to develop a theory of change, to create metrics and benchmarks for reporting structures. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. For certain kinds of giving, at certain scales, it makes sense. But I want to suggest a simpler approach. Find someone whose radiance you've witnessed. Someone whose creative energy makes the world more beautiful. Someone whose stability holds others together. Someone who, if freed from survival, would generate ripples you cannot even imagine. And give them money. No strings, no reports, no oversight. Just money and trust. And the joy of watching what happens when a luminous person is given the resources to shine without constraint. This is not complicated philanthropy. It is not sophisticated wealth management. It's not going to get you a profile in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. It's something older and simpler, and I believe more powerful. It is the recognition that you have more than you need, someone else needs more than they have, and you can fix that discrepancy with a few keystrokes. It's the understanding that money, like water, wants to flow, and that the blockage is the problem, not the solution. It's the joy of circulation. Let me close with an image. Imagine, if you will, in a world which everyone who has crossed the threshold of enough, not just the billionaires, but the 100,000aires, the millionaires, everyone with surplus identified one person of extraordinary creative or moral or relational value and liberated them from financial constraint. Not as an investment, not as a strategy, not as tax deduction, as an act of beauty. Imagine the ripples, the creators suddenly free to create, the stabilizers suddenly free to stabilize without depletion, the warm presences suddenly free to radiate without the dimming effect of scarcity. Imagine what gets built, what gets healed, what gets invented, what gets loved into existence. This is not utopian. This is purely practical. The resources exist, the people exist. All that is missing is the will to circulate rather than accumulate. Tonight, I am exercising that will. I am circulating. I am taking resources that had pooled around me through luck, through labor, through the accidents of history and the generosity of others, and I am sending them where they can do more good than they ever do sitting in my accounts. And I am doing it with joy, with gratitude, with the profound relief that comes from no longer carrying water that someone else needs to drink. To the recipient of this gift, you owe me nothing. Not a report, not a thank you, not an accounting. This is not a loan. This is an investment. This is not even a gift, really. It is a return, a restoration, a small correction in the great imbalance of things. Go create, go build, go love, go be exactly the radiant, stable, creative, valuable presence you have always been, but now with the background hum of financial security. The rest of us will be watching, not to monitor, not to marvel, not to evaluate, but to enjoy, because your flourishing is our flourishing. Your liberation is our liberation. Your beauty is our beauty. That is what stewardship means. That is what circulation means. That is what tonight means. Thank you very much for listening.